All right. Well, it's been a big weekend, big week. Mother's Day, right? Mother's Day, we got a new pope. That's exciting, right? The Knicks are in the playoffs. A lot going on this week. The pope is a Knicks fan, in case you haven't heard. We can't prove that, but he went to Villanova, and so did a bunch of guys on the Knicks. Anyways, this is a great weekend. If you haven't been here before, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. And at this point in the service, we typically continue our teaching series. And that's what we're going to do today. In fact, today we're going to wrap up a teaching series called Church Hurt. But don't worry, I'll bring you up to speed real quick. What we've been talking about is Jesus, which is probably no surprise, but specifically how people of all different walks of life, all different religious backgrounds, all different levels of religious interest and involvement, all different ages, all different kinds of people went to Jesus looking for help and looking for hope. And they found it. And more often than not, they didn't just find what they were looking for, but they were surprised by his goodness, like surprised by just how incredible he was. And at the end of his career or his ministry, he painted a picture of what it was going to be like when he was gone. And the hope, the vision was of this community of people that would carry on his work. He said they would do greater things than him, but they would carry on his work. And in this community, the hope was that people with all different backgrounds, all different levels of religious interests, all different walks of life would come to this community and find help and hope when they're looking for it. And maybe even be surprised by the goodness, the authenticity, the beauty of that community. The church, this is the vision for the church. But I don't need to tell you that sometimes it's like that. In fact, for the last 2,000 years, it has been like that in a lot of places for a lot of people. They go looking for help and hope and find it. But often, they go looking for help and hope, and instead they find hurt. And maybe that's your story. Or maybe that's the story of somebody close to you. And for you, it's caused you to keep church at an arm's length. This is the reality of the church. It's filled with imperfect people. There's a lot of brokenness in the church, so a lot of times the church hurts. And so we've taken a few weeks to talk about different kinds of church hurt. Because we can talk like the potential for church hurt is out there, in other places. But the reality is the potential for church hurt, for people getting hurt in the church, it's here. The potential for that is here. The difference, though, is whether or not we can identify it, and if we have the courage to address it. What we said for the sake of this series is that church health requires identifying and addressing church hurt. So a week when we talked about shame. If you're familiar with shame, shame is this nagging, universal feeling of not being enough. It causes us to act in all sorts of dysfunctional ways. It's the feeling of not measuring up, of not being good enough as a person. And so we do things like blame when we feel shame. We cover, we hide, we deny. Like shame is destructive on so many levels, and it's painful. And we talked about how the message of Jesus, what we call the gospel or the good news, it is the perfect remedy to the universal issue of shame that all of us struggle with. And yet sometimes in these Jesus communities in the church, the message of shame, rather than it being alleviated, it's reinforced. And it can be painful. And it pushes people out of the church. It may be why you stepped out of the church, if you stepped out of the church. Then last week was a heavy week, but we tried to take a real practical approach to church hurt, tried to define different levels or different layers of church hurt, the different kinds of discomfort that people feel in the church. We talked about tough love, which is sometimes painful and uncomfortable, but it's good and necessary. We talked about frustration, which is not fun, but it's the reality of something that is good, right? Community and family. Whenever there's community or family, people living life near each other, you're gonna step on each other's toes. There's gonna be frustration. We talked about pain and even abuse, things that require repair, things that create deep wounds. We took a real practical approach last week. My hope is that we'll incorporate that kind of language into our culture. So we'll be able to express the kind of hurt and discomfort that we're feeling when we're feeling it. We'll have the tools to identify it and address it. This week, we're talking about a kind of dysfunction that it's especially toxic in leadership, but it has a way of making its way of seeping into the community. It not only causes pain within the church, but according to several Barna studies that have been done recently, Barna is a group that studies different demographics and different people specifically around church stuff. This is also often the number one reason why people outside the church don't want to come inside the church. And so it causes damage inside, and it also keeps those who are outside from coming inside. And so we're going to jump right into it. This is the form of dysfunction we're looking at this week. Jesus addressed this in Matthew chapter 23. We actually read from this chapter last week if you were with us, but we didn't read this verse. Jesus said, "Woe to you," which is not a positive thing. This is like not good. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees." Teachers of the law, that's a title. These are people that didn't teach legal law. They taught the Old Testament laws, like Bible teachers. And Pharisees, the religious authorities. He says, "You hypocrites, you hypocrites." And then he goes into his reasoning. "You're like whitewashed tombs," which is not a pretty picture. He says, "which look beautiful on the outside." This is literally, they shine radiantly on the outside, whitewashed tombs. "But on the inside, they're full of bones and dead and everything unclean." Now, this wasn't a normal thing, a whitewashed tomb. You probably wouldn't whitewash a tomb, but the idea is that there's dead bodies on the inside. It's a really unpleasant thing, but on the outside, everything is made to look just right, like super nice. It shines radiantly. He says, "In the same way, on the outside, you," speaking to the religious leadership, "you appear to people as righteous, like you got it all together. But on the inside, you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness." What Jesus is talking about here, and what he talks about throughout this entire chapter, is what we call hypocrisy. And he's addressing it specifically with religious leadership, with people in positions like mine. Now, hypocrite, we define that in different ways in different contexts, but in the original language, the word hypocrite, it literally means to pretend, or it can be a title of someone who plays the part. Like in culture, you could be a hypocrite. That could be a hobby for you. It means you're in plays, you're in shows. A hypocrite was someone who puts on a mask and pretends to be someone they're not. And Jesus is addressing religious hypocrisy among the religious authorities. He's not saying you're imperfect. He's not saying you make mistakes. Like that happens, we all make mistakes. He's saying you present one way, but really you're another, right? So it's not like if I were to say to you, you should be patient. Patience is good. Right? It's good to have patience. But then you find me doing something impatient, which you will find me doing if you spend any amount of time with me, right? Like that's not what he's talking about. But if I were to say you should be patient because having patience is a good thing, and I'm such a patient person that you should be patient like I'm patient, and then you see, oh, he's not a patient person. That's hypocrisy. It's pretending. It's playing a part. And I'm sure you've heard the stories. You've seen it. Right? There's people in positions like mine, in places like this, that are up in front talking about how they believe something, and then you find out they don't really believe it. They talk about the importance of protecting people, the weak and vulnerable, and then you find out that there's a pattern of abuse. Right? Or they talk about family values, the importance of treating your spouse with respect and sticking together. And you find out they're with someone else, and they have been. It's a double life. It's pretending to be something you're not. They talk about love and serving one another and the importance of that. And then you find out that they lead a culture of disrespect and mistreatment. This is what religious hypocrisy looks like, and it's damaging. And it might be for you. It might be the reason why you're like, yeah, no, I don't want anything to do with church. It's faking it. And it causes all sorts of problems. Jesus is addressing this specifically at the level of leadership because it creates problems for entire communities. And so real quick, three quick principles around religious hypocrisy, right? That might be helpful when dealing with religious hypocrisy. One, in the church as an organization, right? And I would argue in all organizations. A church is healthy as an organization when the closer you get to the center, the healthier it is. That's a sign of health, right? So for here, this church, we have the management team at the center of the church. Then we have pastors and staff. Then we have leaders among the team. Then we have the team. Then we have people that go to the church, right? If you attend the church and you decide to get more involved, the closer you get to the center, the healthier things should be. If you see the opposite, that's a red flag. Right? It means it's an unhealthy culture or something needs to get fixed. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean there aren't mistakes. It means you should see a greater level of authenticity, sincerity, commitment, intention in a healthy organization. If you see the opposite, especially here, if you're here and you join the team and you see the opposite, we want to know. That's important. It's important to know that. Secondly, so the healthier you get to the middle, the closer you get to the middle, the healthier it should be. Secondly, religious hypocrisy is a reality. We do see that. And it is so important. I heard a pastor say this once that was so valuable. He's like, it was so important that you don't confuse someone's ability to communicate from the front of a room with their level of devotion to Jesus. Right? Because the reality is sometimes people pretend. And it's not good and it shouldn't happen. But sometimes someone who can communicate a message about Jesus effectively doesn't actually practice that in their lives. And that can be upsetting when you find that out. Which is why, for the third thing, it is so important that as you're coming here week after week and reading and praying and doing all this stuff, right? That your faith is being built on and in a relationship with Jesus and not on any particular teacher or leader or person, because people are going to let you down. And if the erosion of some leader's faith messes with your faith, that should be a sign to you that it needs to be built more on Jesus and less on people. And so if we keep those three things in the back of our minds, I think that will help us deal with religious hypocrisy in leadership. However, the reality of religious hypocrisy is that it tends to seep its way into the community, right? And what it tends to create is a culture, an unpleasant culture of appearing religious. And at its worst, it can become a culture in the church where everyone wants to look holier than the other, right? Where there's a lot of comparing, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of condemnation. But it could also very simply show up as pressure to perform and fear of being found out. It's a culture of pretending. And it may be, don't get me wrong, it may be pretending with the best of intentions, not trying to do anything harmful. But there can be pressure in a place like this where we talk about striving for good things and representing Jesus. There can be a culture, there can be pressure to perform, to make it look like you have it all together, to play the part. I'm in church. I'm not gonna, act this way when I'm in church. I'm not gonna admit my failures when I'm in church. And there's fear of being found out, right? This is very tied to shame, like we talked about on week 1. We call this image management. Now, image management is not a church thing, it's a people thing. This is something that we do in society. This is the product of our broken condition, but it's especially toxic in church. With image management, I have to control the version of me that I want you to see, right? And so I'll curate how I want to be seen and known and understood, and I'm creating this and here, accept this version of me. I don't need to tell you this, but it's gotten 1,000 times worse since social media has entered so many of our lives. There's never been a time where our image has been more visible to more people. And there's also never been a time where we've been able to manage it so well, right? I could take 45,000 pictures of my face until everything hits just right? Put the filter on. Now I can hit the little cleanup button. Bing, like let's remove that, right? Like you can just, and it's like here, done, right? And you cook it and send it out to the world. And I'm not poo-pooing social media. There's a place for it. Like social media can be useful and helpful. I do think you should be aware of how much time you spend on social media because it could also be very damaging. But you need to be aware, these are all managed pictures. This is not reality. And if you're like me, I look at social media at like my worst, you know? It's never the highlight of my day. Something amazing just happened. Let me go online. No, it's like I got nothing to do. I'm feeling down. I'm depressed. And I take out my phone. My breath smells. I'm dirty. I'm sweating. I'm at my day's worst, right? And I'm looking at everyone shining bright, you know? It's upsetting. And you need to be aware that you're comparing, often you're behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, right? Because this is the reality of image management. But it's also often a reality in church. And the reason it's so damaging is one, because it's exhausting to keep up the image, especially in church. To make it look like you got it all together. It's exhausting. And what's even worse is that it leaves you to struggle alone. When there's a fear of being found out, I've got to handle my issue on my own because I can't let you into it. And it's dark. And shame grows in the darkness. And when there's a community where everybody's doing that, everybody's pretending, no one's winning. It's not helping anybody. So the question is, what do we do? What do we do in a culture where image management is the norm and where it can seep into the church? Jesus had some very strong things to say when he showed up, not specifically about managing your image, but about who he came for and what that means for us as far as it affects managing who we are and how we appear. There's this scene, it's recorded by Mark in the 2nd chapter. I think he hits the nail on the head here, but he talked about this in a lot of other places, and so did his followers. He said this. It said, when the teachers of the law, those same people we referenced before, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and the tax collectors, they asked his disciples. They had some questions, okay? Now, a little background here. Eating in the ancient world was a sign of acceptance. In fact, people in the religious world, religious leaders, often didn't even eat with lower ranked religious leaders because they didn't want to show too much acceptance if they were higher than them. So Jesus is eating with a group known as the sinners and the tax collectors. Okay, sinners, these people are just known for not having it together, right? And then there's this other group, tax collectors. There's a story behind these people, but nobody likes them. You know how you know no one likes them? They don't even have the privilege of being lumped in with the group called sinners, right? They get their own category. And Jesus just eats with them, just hangs with them. And so the religious authorities, the pretenders who are obsessed with making it seem like they have it all together, they've got questions for Jesus and his disciples. And the question is, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus doesn't even let his followers answer. He's like, I got this one. He goes, on hearing this, Jesus said to them, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. He says, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Sinners. Now, the word sinner, it literally is someone who falls short, who misses the mark. This is a passage I think we don't give enough emphasis to. What he's saying is not that he came for the righteous and the sinners, but only for the sinners. The implication here is that there's one group of people. The playing field is level. There are people who fall short. And then there are people who fall short but act like they don't. And what Jesus is saying here is, look, if you think you have it all together, then I have nothing to offer you. And the proof is in the pudding. If you read the biographies of Jesus, what you'll see is that the only people who were not changed by the things that Jesus said were the people who thought they had it all together. They're the only ones who didn't benefit from him being there. what he's doing here, it's like he's redefining the win. In a culture where everyone feels like they need to look the part, play the part, have it all together, appear adequate, Jesus is like, no. The new win is embracing your inadequacy. Acknowledge that you fall short. That's the new win. We're talking about embracing imperfection. Embrace it. That's what he's doing. He's not cheering them on. He's not saying like, you tax collectors, you keep ripping people off. Like keep doing, it's not celebrating what they're doing, but he's embracing them in spite of their imperfections. And when we know that, if you believe that Jesus embraces you with your imperfections, it gives you and I the freedom to acknowledge them. Like, yeah, I don't have it all together, and I don't have to. I'm not celebrating it. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm so great, I still can't get this area of my life together. But we can embrace it and recognize like, this is where I am. And that's okay. Here's what it looks like. So the Apostle Paul, right, is one of the most influential people who's ever lived. Right? If we're rating Christians, he gets an A+, okay? He's done tons and tons of things. And here's what he says. He's talking to someone he trained named Timothy. He says this to Timothy. He says, here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Like, don't doubt this, okay? Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. The word save, it means to help, to deliver, to save, to rescue. He's here for the sinners, for those who fall short, right? But then he throws in like a little P.S. Of whom I am the worst. Now, if you were friends with Paul, you'd be like, no, you're not. Like, I know other people, you're not the worst. But this is where he lives. He's like, I'm not afraid to embrace it. I'm not afraid to. There's this tension here, right? But then he continues, he's not done. He says, but for that very reason, that I'm the worst, I was shown mercy so that in me, remember, the worst of sinners, in me, Christ Jesus might display his immense patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life to the full. He's saying like, if you want to know my story, if you think your story is bad, you say like, check out my story. And if there's patience for me, if I'm embraced with my imperfections, when I'm at my worst, he's like, that should be an example to everybody who comes after me, that they can embrace their imperfections because Jesus has embraced them. Now, again, there's this tension, right? Because God invites us to something greater. We are challenged to be people with more peace, with more joy, with deeper hope, right? And that looks like progress. And he wants to take you there. But anyone who's done any kind of 12-step program knows that in order to make progress, you have to accept, embrace where you are. It works, like it's effective. The research will show you that in order to make progress, you have to embrace the state that you're in. Not beat yourself up for it, not feel shame because of it, but embrace the imperfection. And when we're talking about church hurt, the idea here is that you can bring your hurt to church. This is the place where it is safe to not have it all together, to not feel like you need to manage your image, to not look like you're checking all the boxes. This should be the place where you could let your guard down. You can bring your hurt to church. You can embrace your imperfection. And there's something so beautiful about this. One, like I said, you're enabled to make progress. Once you're like, this is where I am. I'm not going to beat myself up for it, right? But this is where I am. There's something about that frees you up to move forward. But at the same time, it also means like if we do this together, it means that we're not in it alone. You don't have to struggle in the dark. Just this last week, during our group, we're talking about like parenting issues. We talk about that a lot because everyone in my group has young kids. And we're talking about a decision we need to make with my son. Like, should we let him do this? Should we not let him do this? We're going back and forth. We're trying to figure this out. There's weird feelings emotionally. I'm like, I feel kind of bad for this. And someone in my group, she's like, she hears the story. She's like, I think we should let him do it. And she said, we should let him do it. we're like, okay, we kept talking. At the end of the night, like we're in bed and Allie's like, my wife, she's like, I love that she said we should let him do it. She's like, it's a small thing, but it meant so much to me. Like, of course, it's not a group decision how we're going to parent our child. But it just felt like we were in it together. Like, this is the idea. You don't have to struggle alone. But if we're all there like, oh, our kids all have perfect grades, and we all feel great about that, and we're the best parents, and we're playing the part, the show, we're left to struggle alone with our weird emotions and problems. We're in it together. We have to manage the image. And so here we like to say you can be flawed. You can be flawed, but you can't be fake. You don't have to pretend. You've got permission to be in progress wherever you are on your journey. And you're not alone. When someone comes up to me, which happens on a somewhat regular basis, and shares a deep hurt, a deep struggle, a dark secret, maybe a secret in the past, maybe a secret in the present. Like one of my first emotions is relief. Like I'm relieved that they got it out. They didn't run. They're not hiding it anymore. You can bring your hurt to church. Getting it out is freeing, and it grows in the dark. But it requires the courage to embrace your imperfections. In the right context, I'm not saying you have to broadcast it and post it on social media, but in the right context, in a safe setting, it is so healthy to bring out your struggles, your fears, the things in life that you don't want to embrace. If you're a mom, maybe this Mother's Day feels imperfect. Maybe it's not because of something you've done. Maybe it's just the reality of life, the imperfection of life's circumstances. What does it look like for you to embrace that? A shame-free embrace. I'm not saying you have to celebrate it. I'm not saying you have to be happy about it, but what does it look like to not beat yourself up and to just recognize that it is what it is, and that's okay. Maybe you don't talk to your mom, and that stinks. What does a shame-free embrace look like for you today? Maybe there's tension between you and your mom, your daughter, your kids. Maybe you've been dreading Mother's Day. It's not something you want to celebrate like everybody else. What does it look like to give yourself permission to be where you are, to not beat yourself up because of it? In whatever season of life you're in, whether you're mom or not, whatever challenge you're going through right now, what does a shame-free embrace of that imperfection look like? Whether it's something you've done or something that happened to you. Maybe you're unemployed. What does it look like to accept that? To just recognize this is what it is. If you're like me, like if something goes wrong, I want to beat myself up. I don't want to talk about it to anyone. I just want to solve it in my head and feel the weight and darkness. But there's something so liberating about just being like, here's where I am. Maybe you're in a season of financial struggle. And this is not the story you would have written, but it's where you are. What does it look like to give yourself permission to accept that? Maybe you're going through marriage issues and you hate it and it stinks. What does it look like to embrace the season you're in? Like, okay, this is where we are. And it's okay. Where do we go from here? What's the next right thing? Rather than letting the shame seep in, which will not help, rather than letting yourself beat yourself up, what if we embrace the imperfection in life? It's light and free. There was a speaker here last year. His name's Greg Lee. He's somebody I look up to. He was up here. He spoke. He finished. He went and sat down. When I sit down, as soon as I'm done, first thing I do is turn off my mic because the music's going to come on. I don't want my voice to go through the microphone. But he didn't turn off his microphone. And he has a wonderful speaking voice, terrible singing voice. And he starts to sing. Now, it wasn't in the room. Nobody could hear it. But it was live online for the whole internet to hear. And I remember finding that out. I think I found it out the next day. I felt so bad. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy came from Chicago to speak here, and I got to tell him we broadcasted his terrible voice to the whole world. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm going to take it down. I will change it. We'll edit it. Well, whatever. And he's just laughing. And he's like, don't worry about it. Like, I have a bad voice. Okay. And I was like, it stuck with me. I'm like, he embraced that imperfection. It's light and free. It was attractive. What would life look like? We just embrace that. Embrace your situation. Embrace your story. Even if you've done something you're not proud of, recognize where I am and where do I go from here. We're out of time, but I want to leave you with one more story. I have permission to share this story. But several years ago, a good friend of mine was volunteering. I was doing this internship as a volunteer at this nonprofit. And she was with a teenage girl. They were in a car, and they were driving, and she ran out of gas. And so she pulled the car over to the side of the road, and a police car pulled up right next to her. So you got the sound effects. Police car pulls up to check on her. The cop was very nice. He's like, what happened? She's like, I ran out of gas. He's like, no problem, I'm going to help you out. But he's like, but I need your license. It's protocol. She's like, no problem. She reaches for her license, and she realizes the day before she went to a water park with this girl, had moved her license around. It wasn't where she thought it was, so she didn't have a license. So she's like, I'm so sorry, I don't have it with me. And he's like, okay, just give me your information. I'll look up your license. She's like, no problem. Gives him the information. He looks it up. He sees, now she was in a different state, and her license had just expired. So he looks up the license that she doesn't have, and it's expired. On top of that, in the state where she had her license, points on the license was a good thing, and whenever you had a violation, you lost points. But in the state where she was, points were a bad thing on the license. And so on her license, she had the maximum amount of points because she had no violations. And so she didn't have her license. It was expired, and it had the maximum amount of points. At least that's what this police officer thought. And he put her in handcuffs and took her to jail. And it was a dark moment for her. She's someone who never made any mistakes, all straight A's in school. She's volunteering for free at a nonprofit, taking care of this teenage girl, and she goes to jail. Now, she was only there for about a day, less than a day, about 14 hours, but she went through the whole thing. She got a letter from the precinct apologizing because it was a mistake. It's been expunged from her record, but she went through the whole thing. She got a bunk. She was put in a jumpsuit. She was given a meal, and eventually she was bailed out after 14 hours. She got a mugshot. And while she's going through it, this is not the story that she would have written. I asked her, she said I could show you her mugshot. This is what she looks like. This is, in case you don't know, this is my wife, Allie. Who was just up here a couple of minutes ago. She said I could share because it's Mother's Day. I was there. We were dating at the time. We weren't married. I was in the waiting room for 14 hours. I wasn't given a meal or a bed. But it was, in the moment, it was hard for her. And even afterwards, it was hard. She didn't do anything wrong. There were a few mistakes, but she didn't get what she deserved. And for a little while, she wanted to keep it in the dark. It was embarrassing. It was shameful. But since then, she's learned to embrace the imperfection. I wore this to our church Christmas party. And so sometimes you got to put your mugshot on a t-shirt. But for her, this is what it looks like. Okay, this stinks. Like I would not have written it this way, but it's part of my story. So what do we do? I don't know what it looks like for you. Maybe there's some part of your story you're not proud of. Maybe something you did you're not proud of. But what would it look like to just with no shame recognize, okay, here's where I am. It doesn't define me. It's not my story, but it's a chapter in it. And that's okay. And so we move forward. Embrace the imperfection and bring your hurt to church. Hey, this is Lou. Thanks for listening. I hope that this was helpful for you in some way. So a lot of people don't know this, but Community Church is completely supported by the generous donations of people like you and me. And if you'd like to join that community of financial supporters, you can go to communitychurch.net/give, or you can give anytime on our church app. And so thanks for being part of this community, whether it's locally or from a distance. Thanks for investing in your faith. And thanks for being part of something that's bigger than yourself. Hope to see you soon.